That's what I said. That's why I turned it over.
Okay, folks, we're going to get started. Here we go, everybody. I want to welcome, this is the Elected Officials Transportation Committee. It's Thursday, June 20th, and this is our quarterly meeting. Welcome to all the new members. Welcome to all the old members. This one feels really old. And I think we're going. I just pulled an all-nighter. It's true. We're gonna go right into public comment. Do we have any public comment today? Is there anybody here who'd like to get up and say something? Speak now, or okay. It doesn't seem like we have public comment.
Chair, if I may.
Oh, please.
I do have one letter from Tony Kronberg. I don't know if it's specific to one item on the agenda. I don't know if you'd like me to enter it now or if you'd like to wait until we get to
Why
that.
don't we wait till it's with the proper time of the agenda, then you've got a copy you can enter into the record with whomever does that. Maybe it's you.
He does.
All right. And then so item number 2 is, actually we're going to move that down, right? I know we have a change because Stephanie Zaza is not here.
Right.
So we're going to move that down. We're going to go to item number 3 right off the bat because I think there are other people here. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so this is the Brush Creek Park and Ride flap improvements. And take it away, David. I'll give it to you.
All right, well, thank you, Chairman. Before we get into the first item, I'd just like to go through a few reminders about the EOTC. The first is about the enabling legislation and ballot requirements, that the purpose for the EOTC is to finance, construct, operate, and manage mass transportation systems within the Roaring Fork Valley. We do have a mission statement, and that mission statement is to work collectively to reduce and or manage the volume of vehicles on the road system and continue to develop and support a comprehensive multimodal long-range strategy that will ensure a convenient and efficient transportation system for the Roaring Fork Valley. And we do have an IGA in place, and that has a number of things in it, but it does engage the EOTC to implement the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan, which does include separated dedicated transit way between Aspen and Snowmass and Aspen in the airport, as well as the operation of park and ride lots at Brush Creek Airport and/or Buttermilk. And some operational reminders that this is a recommending body only for the expenditure of the half-cent transit sales and use tax, and that each jurisdiction must vote with 51+% for the recommendation to progress, and that only budget items must be approved with a quorum by the member jurisdictions.
And that's it. So thank you. That's something we should probably read at the beginning of every quarterly meeting. It's like the Articles of War that the captain reads on the deck of the ship, right? So
Exactly.
to get everybody in line as we move forward.
Rocking the boat on that.
Yeah. It's supposed to be motivational. So looking at the items that we do have on the agenda, Greg, the chairman, discussed moving the first item down to number 3. We had that one first, just so you know, because Stephanie Zaza, the facilitator, was supposed to be here. She had a death in the family and had to leave unexpectedly. So as a result of that, move that one back and try to get some of these other folks out of here who are here for other items a little bit sooner. So move right into the Brush Creek Park and Ride Flap Grant after this, and then into the dynamic message sign, since those are our 2 action items. Then we'll discuss the EOTC retreat, the Snowmass Village Transit Center with Dave Peckler, and the RAFTA retreat and ballot measure 7A update with David Johnson from RAFTA. So we'll come back to those slides. So the FLAP grant, a little bit of a background on the current status. We are currently at 30% plans. We have done some outreach, so we've done local meetings, if you'll recall, with the surrounding property owners. That was done in January and February. We did have an open house at CMC in April, and we had a public opinion survey that was conducted for several weeks in May. Currently, the timeline, we're moving into final plans, and the Pitkin County well septic permitting and engineering is expected to be completed in 2020. We are planning on coming back to you in the spring of 2020 with 70% plans. So this meeting here tonight is to make sure that we're all moving forward in the direction that you'd like to see this going as we move into those 70% plans. Construction is planned for 2021. And just a reminder on the project scope, this is a FLAP grant, so Federal Highways Administration, Federal Lands Access Program grant. They are very competitive. We are very lucky to have gotten this grant. But the scope is limited to restrooms, paving, well, and septic, as well as accessory lighting and landscaping. The current estimates for the project are currently at $4.2 million. We, over the last couple of days, we have met with the Federal Highways Administration as well as the consulting engineer, who are both here. They'll be able to answer your questions as I go through this this evening. It appears that we're right at about that estimate right now at about 4.2 million with what we'll go through here this afternoon. So just keep that in mind. There are some options here that could require additional EOTC funding. We'll have a more exact estimate come next spring based on the feedback that we receive here and once we get farther into the design. Some of the items that we'll be going through, they're considered action items. Like I said, we are looking for basically confirmation that the direction that staff is providing to the consulting engineers is correct and is in conformance with the direction you'd like us to go. With that, I'd like to invite John Knowles up to give you a little update or background on the Federal Highways FLAP program and where we are in that process.
Welcome. Come on up.
You guys. My role and my title with Central Federal Lands Division of the Federal Highway Administration is I'm a project manager. And my job is, once these projects are programmed, to deliver the project. So we either deliver the project internally or externally. We develop the design, We also do the actual construction. We'll hire a contractor and we administer that contract. So you guys applied for and received money from the Federal Lands Access Program. And so every so often, every several years, we do a call for projects and people apply for them. And it's a competitive process based on merit and also match. And in the state of Colorado, the minimum match is 17%. And on this project, we're overmatched. And there are some things that we're doing that aren't typically eligible for those funds, but since you're overmatched, it's a part of the project. Let's see. Right now, we have a call that I think ended, I think it was the first part of June or the end of May for a call, the next round for the call of projects. And we're kind of going through the process of selecting projects for the upcoming years. So right now, the FLAP program is contributing $2.2 million for this project. And the EOTC is committing $2 million to the project. So that's where we're coming up with the 4.2 million. And like David said, we're a little bit over budget right now, but that's fairly typical with projects. And then as we try to refine the scope and try to, match the program amount with the project, I'm hoping that some of that'll come down, or we'll just have to come up with more money. So.
Oh, great, thank you.
So that's kind of where we're at right now. As David said, it's a 2021 project, and that's when we plan to obligate the funds for the project and also start the construction project. So that's kind of all I had. If you have any questions about the program, about the process.
Clarification,
Marky.
so you will hire the builder?
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
We will go out for a contract. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll go out for a bid. We'll select a contractor.
How long does that process take?
Well, usually it takes about 2.5 months.
Oh, okay.
So we'll advertise for a
still
month.
reasonable.
We receive bids, then we have to review the bids and make sure bonding's available for the low bidder. And then at that point, we'll award the contract, and then we can start construction.
John, you had mentioned that at the point we would have to get more money, meaning
Right.
the FLAP or EOTC.
Well, right now, there's 2.2 million.
1.5 coming through.
Right now, there's 2.2 million available in FLAP. So that's all we have at this point.
Right.
So it would either have to come from you guys or
Okay.
some other sources at this point.
John, this is Commissioner Curry, just come in from another
Hi,
meeting.
Commissioner.
Hi.
Welcome,
Sorry
glad
I'm
you're here.
late.
No problem.
Other questions, comments from the,
Just thanks for your
Steve?
assistance.
There was a discretionary item, whether to do the covered thing on the special events area or not. And I take it, looking at this take on the budget initially is, that would be off the table unless we're willing to come up with more money for that in the meantime.
Yeah, and we'll discuss that here more in a few minutes. But there are, like I said, there are a few items on there that you probably noticed in the packet that have budget items with them. One is the covered or partially enclosed. At this point, it appears that where we are in the budget, that all of that would need to come from the EOTC or some other source in order to cover that. And that's why I bring this up, so that as we do go through this, have that in mind, that's where we're looking financially right now.
great, all right. Why don't we keep going and questions will come up?
All right. Well, before I get into the details,
Thank you, John.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to, details of the plan itself, I did want to touch a little bit about touch on the survey just a little bit. This went out in May. It was open for about 3 weeks. We got 80 responses. which as it moved out to the public pretty quickly, I think was pretty good. The breakdown was about 31% Aspen, 31% Carbondale, 11% Elgibel, 7% Snowmass, and 6% Glenwood Springs. So the benefit to the survey, as opposed to some of the other outreaches, we were able to capture some people who use the facility but aren't necessarily within the immediate convenient vicinity to where we were holding other meetings. One thing that did stand out from the survey is we did have 45% of the lot users saying that they were occasional. This is important because these are people who are aware of the lot, who know what it could be, and who might be able to transition to being more regular users. So as opposed to someone who marks on here, I'm never going to use it, those are hard people to capture. So that validated a lot of the responses to me that came in terms of the most noted issues and the top ways that we could increase use, because these were the people saying that these are my concerns at that location. So that these are listed in order. The top noted issue was safety, followed by lack of desired bus connections, lack of restrooms, and disorganized, dirty, and then people camping. The people camping kind of goes back to the safety piece. And then top ways to increase use was the advanced warning of congestion, full parking in Aspen or Snowmass, which, as you all know, we've been discussing with the dynamic message sign. As well, followed up closely by permanent flush toilets, which is in the FLAP grant, increased security, paved parking, and the carpool kiosk, actually, we threw in there not expecting anybody would honestly choose it, because it's kind of an odd thing to choose on, on a survey. But it did actually score higher than we suspected.
Hey, David, could we go back? I don't know if you skipped it or I missed it. Light pollution, I know that's a big concern.
It is. Yeah, so the top concern, this
I
next
was looking
bullet
at
here,
this one okay, sorry, I'm looking at my note list.
was the light pollution, and that came up both at the surrounding property owners meetings, at the public open house, and in the survey. That consistently came up as the number one concern that people had with this project.
I think one of the questions on that, I just wanted to put out there was that, would any new lighting be any different from the lighting that's there, or are the requirements different for, in order to get the flap? Are things going to change, or is it the same sort of lighting? What do we have to expect? I'm not sure you're ready to answer that, but.
Right. Right now, we're not to the point now. We're looking at having those specs at 70%, so we'd have those to you by next spring. At this point, we've noted it as a significant issue. Pitkin County does have requirements for dark sky lighting, so we have the minimum that it'll be dark sky, fully shielded, downward facing, but we don't have placements or cut sheets, so we don't have it to that level of detail. Since the lighting was put in—
Another question while you're on the, Kelly?
When you're done with lighting.
Okay, sorry. And turn your mic on.
Since the lighting that's out there was put in, there has been some new technology in terms of the coloring that's available with LED lighting, as well as like motion sensors or timers and dimming. So there's a lot of other options out there that weren't available at that time. So we do expect that the lighting will get better, even though it could be potentially covering a larger area.
Is the coloration, are you suggesting like a warmer temperature is just less obtrusive? Is that the deal?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it tends to have less of an impact on the night sky.
Got it.
Okay, Kelly, now?
Thanks. With regards to the safety concerns, was there any way to distinguish concerns about personal safety versus safety of property?
Only through the written comments. So it wasn't a choice on the drop-down list that we had. Judging by the written comments, it wasn't something, the property concern didn't rise to an issue that people wrote in. Personal safety did. And I think that goes back to things that we can have the opportunity to address now with lighting, and as we'll discuss later, security cameras and call boxes.
And no camping.
And trying to rein in the camping as much as possible, yes.
Tori?
Do you have records of incidences? We're talking about safety and it's a concern. How valid is the concern?
I didn't go back and pull records from the sheriff's office, if that's what you're getting at.
Kind of.
To compare. So my focus here was what is the impression of people's use of the lot. Because in a way, to me, that's almost more, people's impression of it is almost more important than the reality of whether they will get actually harassed, but whether they feel safe will dictate whether they use the lot or not.
You know, except for the fact that if there's evidence that there is not much incident and that it is safe, we would probably want people to know that.
We would, yeah.
Rachel,
Yeah, just, can you hand me that a little bit more? The
just
microphone?
point it at her.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to get my hands, I have a cold on anything. I kind of following up on that, I don't know if there's any way to do some cross-referencing in the survey that was done, but it'd be interesting to see that if people who marked, no, I never used the lot, and safety would be a top concern, is that why? Because again, it goes back to the impressions, but just kind of see who or how safety was checked. Thank you.
You can share mine if you'd like. It's clean.
So just to move on to some of our takeaways, we were utilizing the survey to see do people generally feel like we're on the right track here? Are we identifying the right things to try to increase use? And it appears that we're hitting a lot of them. If not with the FLAP project, then we're hitting it with other projects, or it's something that we can continue to work on. So things like increased bus connections aren't part of anything that's ongoing right now, but RAFTA is continuing to work on that. And it increased sensitivity to us in terms of lighting and making sure that we get that right as we move into 70% plans. Is there any more questions on the survey?
Just a question, did bicycle connectivity come up? Has that popped into the discussion
It
on
did,
the survey?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on there.
Want to bring it in?
Yeah,
Okay.
that came up in a number of different areas. And again, that's a project that the City of Aspen and Pitkin County have been working on in terms of connectivity to the Rio Grande Trail, but is outside the scope of this project in particular.
Did I see another hand up over here? No? All right. Let's move on.
All right, so in terms of areas where we're looking for confirmation tonight and or action, the first is the reallocation of $70,000 of FLAP grant matching funds from 2020 to 2019. And then the rest are design review items. So this is the special events information booth, the snow melt, solar panels, building sustainability, and security. So these are the ones that staff has identified as we want to make sure that we're going in the right directions in these areas. And you're comfortable with the direction we're going, because as we send the consultants out to do this work, if they're going down the wrong direction, we're essentially wasting money that we could spend doing something useful at the lot. I identified it here as confirmation, so the staff recommendation is the direction that we have been going. So again, we're looking to make sure that we're continuing that if that's appropriate. But we do need official action on the reallocation of the $70,000. I'll go into that here in a second. As I go through the slideshow with the site plan, just so you know, I do have asterisks next to the slides that do require some sort of action, or we're asking for some sort of action from you. If it doesn't have that, then we're letting you know, but still feel free to chime in if there is something out there that we haven't hit on. So the FLAP grant, again, this is an action item. So as a reminder, this is a $4.2 million project. $1.9 million is allocated as match from the EOTC. Federal Highways Administration is administering the grant, as John went over. We do, as we've gotten farther into this, we now understand that the FLAP program will be invoicing us in 2019, this summer and this fall, to about $70,000, which is the reason we're looking to move that from 2020 to 2019 so that we can fulfill those invoice requests when they do get here. There is no increase in obligation, however, and any unspent funds will be sent back to 2020. So if the invoices come in less, then that remaining balance would go back to 2020. So the staff recommendation here is obviously to reallocate those funds. So this would need to, at the end, when we do get into the action items, if you do decide to reallocate these funds, that would come back to you in the form of a resolution to formalize that.
Okay. Now, do we want a motion to do it?
I'd like to do it at the end. If I can go through all of this, if you have questions about items that I'm going over, and then at the end we can make
I was gonna say, I'd take it while you can get it. Get
Yeah,
one off
right.
the
We may
list.
change, what if we change our minds?
Up for it. We can certainly do it.
Bob, was that a motion, Bob?
was a motion.
That's a second.
And you've got a second? All in favor? Okay.
Aye.
All right, just to get clear that one up. All right, we're getting
Rachel,
stuff
thank you.
done. Thank you, Rachel. You never know. We're pretty, pretty mercurial here.
We might
All right.
change our mind though, so.
We're making progress.
You don't want to have to explain it again later in the meeting, after we forget what it was.
The rest is walking through the site plan itself. So to start off on the outside, so there's the areas that we're looking at is the central portion of the park and ride facility. So this slide is intended to highlight the north and south lots. There are no improvements anticipated in either of those lots, and currently the north lot is utilized primarily for overflow parking, while the south lot is utilized for overflow parking and primarily event staging and bus layover. So these are both anticipated to be gated. So the north lot is already gated. The south lot is anticipated to become gated unless there is some sort of event or a reason to be using those lots. So as you can see, if I have a cursor.
There is a cursor there somewhere. You may need John Peacock or somebody to tell us how to use it. Our AV guy is coming up. Hold on a sec.
Newly hired AV guy, so.
Meany's a rookie.
Most important guy in the whole room, right?
Let's see. Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
let's see. Thank you.
All right.
Lucky guy.
See you
So-
next week.
Right now, we've got the gate up here for large trucks to enter the staging area. And then if this area does need to be used for parking, the anticipation is that they would enter through this way and enter back out. And I'll talk about the kiosk location here in a few minutes. But that generally the uses of both of those areas are to remain unchanged as they exist today. Moving on to the bus and truck turnaround. So this is, we do have a lot of tractor trailers that enter this area. We have a lot of buses during special events. Right here, we've put in a bus stop that can be utilized during events. So not on a routine basis, but when the bus platform is overflowing, we can then utilize this space up here, say during X Games or Food and Wine or other events like those. And then we have a pickup and drop-off area directly adjacent to it. So on an everyday basis, this would be where people can drop passengers off, pick passengers up, but it can also double as an event bus stop when that's necessary in combination with the other one on the turnaround. And moving on to parking, there were, I heard some concerns about, oh, you're turning the whole lot into EV parking. That is not the case. And I'll get into the EV conduit here in a few minutes. But generally, we're looking to prep any space that abuts up against a curb to be able to handle an EV charger potentially in the future. There's no funding or an opportunity really as a part of this grant to install those chargers. But we do have the opportunity to get some of the infrastructure in the ground to make it cheaper now and be able to kind of future-proof the lot to be able to do that as market demands necessitate. But in terms of general parking or overall parking, it's supposed to be anticipated to be general throughout the parking lot with potential EV any place where it abuts a curb. With handicap parking, obviously up near the front, some 15-minute parking that actually stood out in the surveys and in the adjacent property owner discussions, is they wanted some place where they could pull in, just stop for 15 minutes and pull back out again. So we're hoping that in combination with some 15-minute parking here, directly adjacent to the entrance where they wouldn't have to wander through the lot, as well as the pickup and drop-off area, we should be able to accommodate that.
Skippy?
Yes.
David,
Oh, sorry.
what's the requirement for,
Oh, need a microphone. Lights on?
is it on? What's the requirement for, handicap parking? Given the additional number of spaces that
We believe it's between about 10 and 12. My name's George.
Oh, bring George. Hey, George, come on up. Need to get you on a mic. Come on. If you can.
We're still,
And identify yourself for us before we start for the record.
Indeed. My name's George Walton. I work with Jacobs Engineering. We contract to federal lands. I was a federal lands employee for 10 years. That's kind of my background. Based on the number of spaces right now, it's somewhere between 10 and 12 for ADA.
The existing spaces or?
No, on the proposed.
Gotcha.
On the proposed spaces, yes.
David, why are we only thinking about infrastructure for potential chargers on curbed spaces?
Because those are the locations where we're able to get conduit on the ground to be able to run electricity to those spaces. I did have conversations with the Department of Energy and Core and Clear about placing chargers down the center.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
The thinking there was that from their perspective, we're not there in terms of a market, and you would end up losing quite a few parking spaces because you have to allow the space for the chargers in between each of those. And the thinking was we're just not entirely clear where the market's going to be able to make that kind of investment at this time.
The market and the technology.
And the technology,
The
yes.
hope is that in the future, the technology will have more confined or smaller chargers, we'd be able to put more in. The other thing is there's a variety of the slow chargers and the fast chargers right now to try, so people who wanted to come through town, we could always direct them there to use the charging stations if they're traveling on their way. But the conduit will be laid now, and if in the future we find there's a greater market in 10 or 20 years, we probably need to be redoing some cement or pavement anyway. At that point, we could gear it up for whatever the market might be.
To that point, what's the expected life on the pavement surface? Is it 20 years?
On the pavement surface, yes.
That's what it's kind of
That's
a
a
general
typical design.
estimate.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And the only thing I might add is we're in this project, we're also upsizing in coordination with Holy Cross, the distribution system and in plans for bus charging in the future.
That's right, we have to do the bus.
And conduit. So we're getting ourselves set up for it.
You know, one of the issues that's come to my attention is the use of the charging spaces by internal combustion vehicles blocking the chargers. In some cases, people think it's malicious. You know, you read those things. So at some point, we may need to, certainly mark them, but all sorts of technologies are coming up to make sure only EVs can get to those chargers, because it's a problem in some
It'll be an
places.
enforcement issue, which we
Yeah.
have enforcement out there anyway, so.
I'm not even sure which presentation I saw recently, but they talk about your first fine being $150 and your second fine being $250, and people respond pretty quickly.
Sure. Steve?
There are a couple of technological things that we don't know which direction it's gonna go, but one of them, there might be a lot of hydrogen fuel cell cars. Might be the way the technology goes. It might not be that everybody has a plug-in electric car and also there will probably be batteries that have 1,000-mile range on them where people won't have to charge their cars so often. So I was wondering, well, why don't we run conduit everywhere, all over every place, but then it's logical to put it where the curbs are because we have the space for the actual chargers there, and we don't have the space, like you said, all the other places.
Right.
This is all the reasoning that went into.
But of course, the bucket
Reinvent.
by then, right, and flip back the other way.
While we're on the topic of digging in, I'll let Marky go first.
Yeah, I have Dave, you're real familiar with the e-bus program, the EOTC. We've got 8 buses, I think, on order right now.
Right.
Will there be a charging unit here for the buses?
We've been discussing that with RAFTA, and they're not entirely sure on the technological side what that's
Okay.
going to look like or exactly where it would be.
Okay.
What we're anticipating, so if you can see, this is a very bright cursor, isn't it? So we've got the transformers right about here. So we're looking at upgrading that to a 3-phase 480 volt, which would be able to supply
Okay.
those
The charge.
those buses. And so the idea is to place, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, is place some conduit down here in anticipation of buses being able to charge down on
Okay.
this back edge.
Thank you.
But the specifics aren't yet determined.
Because I believe right now the plan is for them, we just upgraded the maintenance barn, BRAFTA.
Oh, yeah.
Because we just did some land easement swapping.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be like the key place, I believe, from the get-go.
looking at your map real quick, I see clearly we've got some new pavement in there, and the concerns I have are just about drainage, and I know you guys are on top of it, but we know it's also that mud is just like that Mancos mud that's so slippery and miserable over on the right side, where it's not paved. Just wondering, how's that going to drain? Is the drain doesn't have to go to the pond on the other side, for instance? I know you're on, just wanted to see how that's going to work, 'cause
Certainly. Right above the uppermost red box is the natural swale. And that's where the trunk line is that goes from the pond on the south to the pond on the north. And throughout that are inlets. And then there's also some auxiliary inlets. And really what we're going to do is lay it right on the ground the way it drains today. We can do that without doing much infrastructure change at all, and use those inlets, which are all very upsized based on our research of the drainage study that was done.
when you say inlets, you're talking about an actual grate with a drain and
Correct.
and it can handle the chunks of Mancos shale and that sticky, gooey stuff that we have up there?
That's gonna be your job.
Yeah, I'll be out there
I-
with a pipe cleaner.
I've been down in every manhole out there,
You already
and
know
it's
about
pretty clean.
this. Okay, great.
There are several.
Job I don't want.
There are several, at least one inlet in that south lot. And that can easily be handled if it becomes a problem by doing some kind of BMP, best management practice around it, and still keep it draining.
All right, thanks.
Ready to move on?
Great.
Looking at the carpool kiosk, so this is, the kiosk itself, as you know, is currently located at the airport. And the city of Aspen has gone through the location and extent process through the county. So that's already been completed. They're looking at moving that out to Brush Creek here next month. So the anticipation here, for those of you who haven't been through the conversation up till now, is that the kiosk would be placed on skids. It would be movable up until the point where this plan is finalized and we're able to put down concrete and it's able to be permanently placed. But the location we're looking at now is within this red circle. It would be have asphalt running around the outside for vehicles. It's been analyzed for stacking, and then these round circles are delineators using boulders. The reason for that, as opposed to using vertical curb, is that if the use of the south lot changes for some other parking or whatever it may be, we can more easily rearrange that into whatever we may need to in the future. Initially, we are looking at when it moves out there in July, like I said, it would be placed on skids. It wouldn't be paved yet, but we are looking at delineating it in this fashion so that we can analyze how it performs, what the stacking actually is, what the impacts on the intersection are, and be able to make adjustments from there before we have a finalized plan. So if there are any changes, we would be back to you with those recommendations next spring.
Okay.
I am going to say something. This is a difficult one for me because we already have a congested intersection at Brush Creek and Highway 82 in the morning hours. This is going to be putting more traffic in and out of there. So I'd really like us, since we're moving it in July now, I think we really need to start looking at monitoring what the traffic impacts, the negative ones maybe for people having to pull in and pull out of there. Not just at the intersection, but when you come to the intersection where the bus is pulling in and out. If you drive out there, as I'm sure we all do, that's kind of a difficult transit, to get back out onto the highway with who's turning in, who's going right, who's going straight. So I think we just need to monitor that since we have the time before actually constructing this project to keep an eye on what that early morning or that commuter time in the morning might impact those intersections and the flow of traffic.
And as a designer, it's a wonderful opportunity to have that
Right.
ability to
And we
see.
need to make sure the public knows it's moving in July. It's not moving in July of 2020, it's moving in a couple weeks, so that they're not driving to the airport and having to turn around, because I'm gonna send those calls to somebody other than me.
Ward?
Yeah, the traffic signal there, how is that controlled? That's
See that?
easily adjustable as the traffic study shows that people for the kiosk are getting backed up. Does that flip green light for left turn onto 82, or how is
I
that?
believe that's demand.
I'm not certain, but it's
Demand.
certainly easily
That's a
changeable.
demand signal.
Yeah, I'm in and out there all the
Yeah,
time.
because at night, at night it's
Yeah,
demand.
yeah.
So it's
you
by
know,
a sensor that
Yeah.
if it, okay.
So it's variable throughout the day.
Rachel?
Just to follow up on Patty's comment, and I'm not sure this is really EOTC, it's perhaps City of Aspen Transportation, but when we're dealing with the HOV tagging and the kiosk, you always hear that a lot of people choose to drive their children to school so they will qualify for an HOV pass. And so all we're doing is encouraging people to drive kids to school rather than be on the bus and create further traffic congestion at the Maroon Creek roundabout. So I think we need to talk with the city about how that's done, and if it's not in the school year, it means one thing, but if it's during the school year and you're probably just a fifth grader in your seat, you don't qualify. And so I just want to make sure we're managing that well and it doesn't become a bit of an abuse system there that adds to the problem Patty was already talking about.
Yeah, but that would be a tough one to say, well, I have a doctor's appointed today, or my kid has sports after school.
Yeah,
so I need
but
to-"
it's the same person in the kiosk day after day, and if someone comes in 5 days a week to say, I have a doctor's appointment with this fifth grader, they start to know.
Well, that's gonna be, I don't disagree, but I think that's gonna be a tough one, and
Yeah, it's not easy.
Steve?
If there is a big traffic backup with cars trying to get into the parking kiosk and cars leaving there trying to get on Highway 82, that's causing congestion, all we have to do is move the kiosk more towards the turnaround area down there on one side or the other, and then that gives more road space for cars waiting in the queue to get either their parking permit or to get back on the highway. So I think that would be a simple fix if we find out that it is causing too much congestion. And probably would maybe need to adjust the timing of the light too, to allow for a little bit longer
trying to get,
It's
left
also,
turn coming out of there towards Aspen.
it's not gonna be good.
I really, just me, I think what's gonna happen is people will go over and get on Smith Way and take the back way in versus turning left coming to Aspen, which is already congested.
So they'll go back down and around, never even thought of that.
To some extent, people already do.
Yeah,
That's
some
what-
people
that's what
will,
I do.
for sure.
That has been mentioned, and Mitch Ozier, the director of parking, and I are geared up to monitor
Okay.
how this actually happens. Because a lot of this we just won't know unless you're out there watching how people are reacting to it.
Well, that point is something else to add into the traffic study.
Yep.
Because if we're only thinking about making the left to go into Aspen, well, maybe we have to think about both directions and how much that right turn has been impacted by moving the kiosk.
Problem is this summer, we probably won't have people wanting to use McLean Flats roads because of construction, so.
Patty?
That's actually going pretty well.
I've been riding
Yeah.
up there a lot lately, and it doesn't seem to be stopping cars.
Well,
There are
they
plenty of
haven't-
cars
they haven't
going
got
up
to
there.
the part that will.
Okay, let's bring it back here. John, come on up if you want to say something.
John Kruger, Director of Transportation for the City of Aspen, and I was just texting Lynn. She says that the carpool or the HOV permit's supposed to be driving age only individuals. So we worked on that before when
I didn't know that.
kids and also all sorts of other things and babies were in there.
Already
So
taken some steps.
yeah, we already done that. So that the person handing those out or looking at driving age individuals count. Not everybody else.
So on top of it.
But those
Look at
babies
that.
are driving at earlier ages all
They
the
got the
time.
car seats with the wheels.
John, quick question. Just a quick question for you, John. The idea of a kiosk and a person handing out these passes seems a little outdated to me. Is there any other new technology that's being applied to carpool passing? Is this something that's like our future, or is there a brighter one?
No, I mean, Mitch Ozier, the Director of Parking for the city, is looking at a cell phone or some other technologically way to solve that rather than handing the permit out. So he's doing some research and looking at that.
Take a selfie.
because you understand that it's a body, it's whatever, but also there's some good interaction there too sometimes between the person in the car and not, but they're looking at trying to solve it in a technologically better way.
Thanks.
Maybe if there are 3 or more active cell phones in any car, it gets a permit.
Every car, even with one person sometimes.
With 3 phones. Could I ask one question about the egress that RAFTA uses? Is that a RAFTA right-of-way only? When RAFTA's heading down valley, their buses go off that way. Just wondering if that's ever considered as cars as well. It may be a bad idea, but just wanted to see if it's been
This
considered.
access here is currently gated.
Right.
The one that's only supposed to get vehicles, we get some straggler vehicles that don't realize they're not supposed to be back here.
Right, I was thinking about the RAFTA buses go out that way for their down valley traffic, right?
They do,
If,
yes.
if that intersection became too congested, would it help to have that as an option for running traffic?
It could, and that is actually an option that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, and you can see the outline of a realignment of that access point here.
Okay, all right, sorry, well, all right, do you have a
That would
question?
be
or-
interesting, once they get on the highway, you've
Yeah.
got buses coming in, people trying to get over to Smith Hill Road, buses trying to pull over at Smith Hill Road, and people trying to merge into the,
We've got that already.
yeah, but
Okay, let's
signals
keep it moving here. All right, David.
Looks like nice peak parking.
Moving on to the restroom area. So just as a reminder, the restroom location is mid-station. This was decided on March 21st. One of the benefits to this is it does have the special events or info booth area. So that area is located directly adjacent to the restrooms, which is actually kind of hard to see here, but it's this green box would be the restrooms. And then this dotted green box is the special events flex space. So as Steve brought up earlier, there are 3 options for this area, one being open, one being covered, and one being partially enclosed. There are some benefits to each one, benefits and drawbacks. The open, as you may have noticed from the packet, is the staff recommendation. Mostly because it allows the greatest amount of flexibility in the near term, and we don't really have a good idea how this space might want to be utilized. It's also within the budget, which, as we know, we're getting very close to. The covered option obviously limits the flexibility to a certain extent. So say a special event wants to put up tents and they've got a canopy, then they're limited by that canopy. It does provide some protection from the elements for everyday users, which is certainly a benefit. The cost has been estimated at $600,000. I think I would caveat that by saying that this covering, and George can elaborate on this more, it's intended to be enclosed very easily. So it's not just your standard picnic cover, as well as supporting solar panels if that's desired on there as well. And then the partially enclosed, I've got some renderings that show this a little bit later too. Encloses the back portion. We're not anticipating that would be an enclosed area that would be available to the public on an everyday basis, but would be available for special events. So say during Maroon Bells time, it could be used as a visitor center, that kind of thing.
Great. Dave, how are we doing on time? Just want to make sure. Are you on track here? Just want to keep track of our schedule.
I think we're a little over.
Okay.
All right. So
Talk faster.
I'm
No more questions.
Oh,
Sorry.
give direction on it.
Yeah.
So this is the rendering of the open design. I just like to emphasize here that even if it is open, there is still covered protection for those utilizing the transit facilities. So we have an overhang as part of the restroom facility. So this is the new restroom facility rendered. The furnishings out here, these are just placed here for scale. We haven't made any, there hasn't been any determinations on those. And then back here, this is the existing bus platform. So that would still be in place too for covering. And then this is a rendering of the covered option. So as you can see, it basically covers that area, has some solar panels on top. Oops. And then the partially enclosed encloses the back portion in a similar manner, similar architectural style to the existing RAFTA facility and the restroom facility.
The one thing I would offer is if we go with basically no structure open, We do still intend to, from the proposed restroom, stub utilities over there. So we've got that flexibility if we go that way.
Bob?
But Greg, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the idea to me of $600,000 to put cover on seems like an awful lot of money for a little cover, little bigger, whatever it is. Okay. So that brings a couple things to mind. One is, I'd like to see what a quote is of a more basic cover that doesn't have to fit in with an enclosure 10 years from now or some other time. And I would also like to know if solar panels are put on the roof, how much electricity can they divert? Where would that electricity go? Would it be used for lighting? Would it be just put back into the grid? What would we do with it? And how does that offset the cost of the solar panels themselves?
Those are all good questions, and at this point, I don't think that we're prepared to answer a lot
I
of those.
understand. I understand that.
But that's the direction that we're looking to get here today, so that we can continue to look into those.
Markey?
I think it's really important that some of us who have used RAFTA in the park and ride lot for years, and when I was working in Glenwood Springs, I would ride RAFTA. And that's when the bus connections and snowmass were not the 15 minutes. Sometimes you'd be there 30 minutes to 45 minutes waiting for the bus in the elements, snowy, yucky weather, and $600,000 to me is cheap to stay somewhat warm. There's nothing worse. It begins to discourage you from in the winter using RAFTA if you know you've got a long wait.
Right.
So I'm sorry, but that's just.
Steve?
I've been out there when it's cold.
Steve and then Rachel.
In the long term, I would like to see a really nice enclosed building
Yeah.
there, something akin to the town park station.
Yeah,
is.
Town Park Station or even Ruby
Yeah.
Park.
But
Right now, another option to look at that might be less expensive would be to change the
type of covering.
the
Just
bus
to-
waiting area and
snow's
make
not
it
blowing
more
in.
enclosed.
Yeah.
Because if the wind is blowing and you're there for half an hour
Yeah.
in the wintertime,
Yeah, and it's
even
0
with the little
degrees.
heaters there,
Yeah.
you get cold.
It's cold.
So that would be an alternative. So I think for right now, I would favor just leaving no structure there in the special events thing and do more planning and thinking about what do we want to actually have it be like and accomplish before we go and build anything there.
Rachel?
Yeah, a really good conversation, and it just brings up a lot of things for me. If we're getting back to the purpose that we saw many months ago of, is there going to be some place you can get coffee, or can you what is it? And it's gone from when it was like pictures of a little cafe and a food truck with some potted trees to a special events kiosk. And so that change, I don't know where that terminology change happened. But again, if it's about offering amenities to the people who are trying to get to park there and ride there and maybe have a phone line they can use or God knows what else, then it demands a different type of structure than just unenclosed. And so I think we need to keep an eye on what the purpose is. The second thing that really struck me is I was thinking, when this first opened, there weren't any EVs, and we didn't worry about electric charging stations and how much things change over time. But a long, long time ago, we built park and ride parking at the airport with EOTC money that later became abandoned and became rental car parking. I don't think we ever got paid back the money from having created that parking lot for the EOTC. But the bigger point is that this will still change. What we think we're designing well now will have different needs 10 years from now. I would agree with Markey. It sounds like a lot, but it probably isn't when you consider getting all the electricity and utilities in a building that will withhold the snow and things like that. So, we have to think about what is it really going to be used for. If we're thinking there's going to be an employee out there, whether they're the Chamber of Commerce or Snowmass Village Marketing or anyone, to talk to the guests, or is it just going to be a bulletin board spot, and brochure spot? I don't know what we're hoping the amenities will be in this special events kiosk. But if there's an employee going to be there, it needs to be at least partially enclosed so they don't freeze in the winter, and so people go in and they feel like staying for a few minutes rather than, oh, we'll look at that when we get back, it's too cold, and then they never look at it, So I wonder whether there'd be any value in reaching out to some of our other potential marketing partners and people concerned about the guest experience to see if they could help fund this a little bit. Maybe the ACRA and Snowmass Village is marketing. Forest Service might even have a small program for things like this, for guest information, and others. So anyhow, ski company. I just thought, maybe we should think bigger and more clearly about what we really want the space to accomplish.
I think that's a good point, and that's part of the thinking behind recommending that it stay open for now, so that we can get these facilities in place and tackle that as more of a phase 2, as opposed to building, say, a cover or something there and then say, oh boy, we didn't think this through all the way.
Yeah, just like clarification from you guys and from you, David. I keep hearing the word special event, and it's not clear to me. Does the scope of special event simply mean parking for a special event and information about a special event, or is there a thought that one day, whether adjacent or on the lot, there might be a special event near or on this facility?
I think it could go either way. The initial thinking right now is that this could be a location, say Ride the Rockies comes through. We've got bike paths on both sides. Might be able to utilize it there. Okay. So as a Tough Mudder as a registration area, that kind of thing.
So hearing that, which is also kind of where my mind went, that would be a possibility in the future. Should we be concerned with enclosure or not enclosure around safety concerns? So, either a hailstorm or something darker, right? Does that play into this decision at all for you? And are you thinking about this enclosure in that way at all?
Not necessarily, because most of these events come with their own tents. And so part of the thinking is if they may have their own structures that they want to put up for that type of rest area or registration or whatever it may be. So that is also one of the benefits I see as part of the open, is it allows for that level of flexibility. And if they think that they need to be able to do that.
Well, so, given that, I certainly think having an enclosed facility offers a lot more than an unenclosed. However, the desire to have one doesn't mean we have to overpay for one. And certainly looking at that line item, there's real dollars from real people, taxpayers and the federal government. So, for $840,000, I got a buddy building a 6-bedroom house somewhere. It's not here, but I would want some really good rationale for why those dollars are good spent.
And I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I guess I just would like a clarifying question, and thank you, Rachel, because I was thinking, how do we bring our partners in to both help pay for this and figure out what we're looking at? But my understanding right now is none of that $600,000 is available in this grant, right? So we might have an opportunity to kind of revisit this brainstorming in the context of EOTC budget discussions, rather than holding up any design elements from this if we accept the staff recommendation. Is that true? Is that an accurate interpretation? Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
The only thing I wanted to add that I don't think has been said here yet is, as we've been doing our work, is it open, covered, and closed, we can certainly either now, if we go that way, or for you folks later down the road, it could certainly be constructed in such a way that it was covered and not enclosed, and then it could be easily enclosed. So just to throw that out there, because I don't think that had been said yet.
Patty?
Well, I'm actually supporting the covered with solar panel potential, because I'm looking at solar use for the EV chargers, for not the increased lighting, but the extension of lighting, so we can generate electricity to help operate the facility itself. We're going to have bathrooms that have to be lit. We're going to have security. We're going to have a lot more electric needs. And I think if we're looking at trying to be a sustainable project, we need to be putting solar there wherever we can and bring it back in. And we have partners we're looking at with the maybe the Governor's Office of Energy, the federal, and CORE and CLEAR. So we have partners we can bring in to help us with that. which would also help maybe with the cover facility for the solar on this. But
Before we move on, we're getting close here. The other thing I want to make sure is the orientation of the solar panels is appropriate. The roof, I'm not sure if that's the right aspect, but just want to make
And
sure.
I've got another slide for the solar, so we can talk about that here in a few minutes.
And also during your survey, I'm sure we have the neighbors up on the hill, either on either side, are probably concerned about a growing development there. If it starts growing into something much bigger, we're going to hear about that. So we have to be mindful as we're designing the next thing.
you mean your neighborhood?
That's my neighborhood as well as across as well.
Yeah, as we're talking about flex space, enclosing, heating, doing all these other things, we should take a close look at the land use that is allowed there, and if we're overreaching what's approved and what's acceptable. I have ideas on the solar. The rest of the council knows that, but Bob, I think it would just go back into the grid.
Okay, Steve?
What I suggest is we carry this forward to future EOTC meetings. If the construction's not till 2021, conceivably at our retreat and at future meetings, we could come up with more thought on this and design and still do it on, pay for it from a different means, and it doesn't have to hold up any of the flap grant stuff, and we might still be able to do the construction at the same time.
Do you see a way forward to do that if we approve this today? Or is,
The logistics of that start to become a little bit more difficult, mostly because, and George, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, is the progress going forward now to 70% and making sure we've got permitting going through for the core aspects of the grant and making sure that's done on time. We also don't want to have the engineering team spending time on things that don't actually come to fruition, like I said, because we want to be able to focus their energies on things that, actually.
so we need to hone this down a bit and make a decision here that's going to help you move it.
Yeah, my thinking is there's a lot of loose ends around this area, and I think that there's a lot of desires and there's a lot of possibilities. And there's a lot of restrictions too, like what we're saying with land use, that need to be evaluated, as well as like you were saying with the adjacent property owners and what's actually feasible from their perspective. And I don't know that those have been fully vetted at this time.
Rachel?
Yeah, just to move us along and maybe do a straw poll, I would suggest going with the staff recommendation at this time, and then us drilling down further to kind of a statement of need and purpose of this special events center.
Can that be a motion?
And look at designing and editing later if need be. But I would stick with the budget and what we have as the staff recommendation.
Is that a motion?
It is a
I'll
motion.
second.
Okay, then further discussion?
Now, before we all voted together, but do we still have to vote as Snowmass Village?
Municipalities.
Pitkin County
Oh, we didn't do that
separately?
the first time. Do we have to come back to that? I told you we'd be back to
We
that.
didn't. It was unanimous though, so I think it's safe to say that.
Yeah. And I was just getting it on there to focus discussion.
Right, okay.
No, just in terms of discussion, I'd be supportive of that. I think it's the right thing to do to keep it moving forward. I want to be respectful of all of your guys' process being new here, but I do have some thoughts about the broader picture, so I'll just leave it to you to let me know when they'd be appropriate to bring it in at this meeting or others.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Do I want to break it down into Snowmass, Aspen, and Pitkin, or do we want to?
I would call it if it looks close. we'll
Okay,
go to
let's
individual
call the vote.
jurisdiction.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay.
And
All right.
any opposed?
Any opposed? Thank you. I didn't.
That was close.
Well, that was good.
I was looking
All
for
right,
a
Ask
lot.
if anybody's opposed, just for the record.
Yeah, we did,
weren't
she did.
any.
Now, Skippy, is your comment on this, should we move along, or do you want?
I think we can move along. Just what Rachel
Okay.
was talking about,
Great.
sort of the long-term vision and how we can bring that about. I have some ideas. I'm sure they aren't
Great.
new, but I just want to make sure they end up on a agenda for discussion at some point.
Great,
We
all
have,
right.
how many items left
Remind
to
me
go
if we don't
for
get back, if
tonight?
I don't get back to you, remind you. Got it,
Yeah,
all right.
you got it.
Thanks, okay.
David is
We got
staff support.
2 down, how many to go?
We've got a lot left.
Sorry,
to go.
Marky.
There is
Retreat
a
material.
Thursday night concert in Snowmass. It starts at 6.
I've got a thing to be at 6 too.
I think we
So we
need to
have
move
an hour to
along.
finish the
Just-
rest of
Just
it.
say it,
Crank through
guys.
this, yeah.
All right, I will rip through these things as fast as I can. So just to let you know, there was some discussion about boards. We are looking at a board area similar to what's in Ruby Park to identify special events, things going on, RAFTA on schedules, that kind of thing. Backup restrooms. So we are looking at maintaining some portable toilets out there. On the back side of the permanent restrooms. This would be a screened, covered area for restrooms that can be used during events. So keep in mind that this facility is going to be served by a septic system. You get a whole bunch of people out there, you can overwhelm that. So we need to have
Backup.
We
have
call
a
these
backup.
overflow.
we need a
Overflow
backup.
restrooms.
We're also, for security reasons, looking at closing the permanent restrooms during the evening or during the night, but we still need some place for those people to go, and also during maintenance
To go.
times. Yeah, we don't
Great.
want them using bushes.
Okay, we get it.
This is another item for discussion, in pavement snow melt. Staff recommendation is to move forward with in pavement snow melt.
Solar.
Because of the safety
Right, the safety
concerns that it promotes, it promotes safety. It also encourages transit use because it's people aren't jumping over snow piles or slipping and falling. There are some lower costs in terms of having to hire people, but the downside is it is a major consumer of power. So we're looking. That's the direction we're looking at going, is having that facility. But I know that there are some opinions out there, and I wanted to open up the.
So, David, I know we had this discussion at our meeting Monday night, but if it doesn't go in the direction, we could always just have the pipes put in the ground, and if they decide to add the mechanical room later, that would be the option. That's what I suggest, okay? So no matter what is brought up, put the pipes in the cement, and whether or not the budget's there or not, the pipes could be tied into a boiler. I don't agree with the geothermal. It's not gonna work. And I don't agree with solar because we've had winters where the sun didn't shine from December 12th till the end of January. Solar's not gonna help a snow melt
If we
system.
have battery backup, we might.
I'd vote against
Which is
putting a
better.
snow melt system in. We're
At
trying
any
to
rate,
stop
anyway.
using it, right.
My suggestion would be
Point
put the pipes in the cement. If it's a budget item, at least the pipes are in the cement and something could be done later on.
Good point.
Yeah, Rachel?
Well, I was gonna say, we discussed it as well, was it Tuesday night or Monday night?
Who knows?
The week's gone by fast. And I think we reached a conclusion that we should go forward with the snow melt because of the safety issues and the concerns going forward. You explained it's really fairly minimal on the platform. It's not, overly lengthy type of thing. And, on solar, I definitely want to have solar on the roof of the restrooms and things like that. It is true, it just goes into the grid because we don't have storage, but we also then pull out of the grid to light the lights. I mean, so it is a bit of a wash one way or the other. And the more energy that we can generate on site, I am in full agreement with Patty on that, to offset what our impacts are. But I just, we have snowfall sometimes, and you could have somebody out there clear it, and it's a big mess again 45 minutes later. And so that's where I think there's real value to having snow melt. Limited areas and limited application, but this is public safety, and, we might see thousands and thousands of people a
Totally
day.
agree with you, Rachel.
Yeah.
That's, I'm just looking at a budget point. If it's
Oh,
out
and
of the
I agree
budget-
with your philosophy on it as well. I was just saying I don't agree with dropping it out of the project
No,
at this
no,
point.
if there's any way it can happen, I agree with you.
Okay, Steve?
I would also agree with plumbing it for the glycol type of system. In the future, I would love to see it be heated by a ground heat assisted sort of a system, ideally instead of a natural gas one, but we could work with Core and I think technology's probably getting better in that field, and maybe there will be something in the future. But in the meantime, we could be doing it with the natural gas.
Working with
glycol
Core,
system.
it's all gonna be electrified. And so, heat pumps and everything else, it's not about fossil fuels with Core. But one way or another, if we try to reach out to Core, they're not gonna be interested unless it's all electrified. And that being a heat pump or some sort. And now, meanwhile, that will help the solar situation to run the heat pump.
The There's some new technology on ground source heat pumps, but I don't know if the scale of what would be needed here justifies it, if it's a break-even point. So philosophically, I like the idea of having electrical ground source, but I just don't know. And as we go forward, we can look at what new technology is available and what the scale is to make it worthwhile.
And based on our initial calculations, I don't know that you would get enough out of it to warrant putting it in. I don't know that you would get that much back.
Well, I'm not an expert at it, but that's my field, snow melt and stuff. And believe me, the water coming out of the ground is only going to be about 50 degrees. We need about 110 degrees to melt decent snow.
I'm right there with you.
Okay, so it's geo is not going to work.
I agree.
Okay, we'll be spending too much money on electric to boost the temperature of the water.
Okay, let's.
I'm gonna just real quick because it's been bouncing around, and I'd just like to get it out there. With the solar, typically, it goes to the grid, but if you're producing more than you're using, your meter spins backwards.
Right.
So you are using it both ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, do we need, well, since we're in our,
Sustainability and security, lighting.
Yes, those should be easier, I think.
since we're on the topic, do you want to call this one right now? Does anybody want to have a
That
motion
seems to
on
be
this?
working, yeah.
A motion for a snow melt plumbed, but take it only that far until we design it further?
I move to plummet for the snow melt system using the
Yeah, and I will second that.
glycol, the natural gas glycol.
By the way, how many square feet are we talking about here, David? George?
The platform is, I'm gonna cheat here for a moment. It's about 40 feet wide, 43, I believe, and it is roughly 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, plus about 175 feet.
Okay.
6,000 square feet.
So you're looking at a very large boiler here. I mean,
That's what we've been coming up
right,
with.
So, I mean, you might want to cut down some of the square footage, okay? Because, basically you're looking at 115 BTUs per square foot. That's the minimum.
We actually did in our field reviews and discussions, we have cut it back some already. And we've also built in flexibility for if if the info and special events building goes in, it can easily be transitioned.
But I'll second Steve's
We've got a
motion.
motion and a second. Further discussion?
Yeah, I have a question because I'm not a snow melt expert and probably some of the public isn't. Regardless of whether we go electric, solar, boiler, otherwise, the plumbing that we're talking about will be the same. It's simply where the electricity comes from to plummet. Just want to make sure.
So
Okay.
if it's electric, it's still going to have a glycol, it's still going to have pipes.
Okay.
And,
That doesn't change.
That's the system.
Rachel?
Yeah, I'm full agreement with the motion. Just wanted to make sure it was clear as well that not only plumbing, the planning for where a boiler would go or things would go to connect,
Absolutely.
even if we're not putting it in. And then secondly, when we talked about it Monday night, we talked about making sure we have some real control to on-off it. And that that when we have that warm spell in January for 3 weeks, it's not running all the time.
Well,
I mean,
every snowmelt system now has to have a slab sensor that
Okay.
is activated by moisture and temperature.
Thank you.
So it will not activate if it's above 35 degrees.
Okay, fantastic.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right, okay. Check. Moving right along.
All right, so just clarification for me, so we're put the pipes in. If we do find that we have money in the budget to put in a boiler and continue that,
Back to us.
we should move forward.
Just do it.
And speaking to Rachel's question, we are sizing the mechanical room to be ready for it.
Good.
And we're looking at over 6,000 square feet of heated space there.
And by the way, real quickly, that could be zoned. It could be zoned.
Be zoned, right.
So, I mean, if there's a need, if we have some that's on the south side, maybe the north side walkway might need more.
We
It's
need
just
it
a
there.
matter of a couple more sensors and different pumps, okay?
And in working with RAFTA, you can deduct out the footprint of the restroom because it'll have its own system.
I want to suggest an obligation to bring Corey in, just so we,
They've
they
already
may.
been brought in.
Yeah, okay, so they're part of this.
As
Just,
the state, as the feds, as.
right, okay, thank you, because I don't want to put in a system that we're going to regret or be embarrassed by
Right.
5 years from now.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
So
Okay, now we're moving right along to,
The next one is solar. From a staff side, we've been pushing solar on the roof of any building that we're putting in. The cost of that is about $50,000 to $100,000 based on the size of the array. Because of visual impacts, we haven't gone down the road of evaluating any ground-mounted arrays yet. So I wanted to get a feeling from you whether you would like us to pursue looking into ground-mounted. That would be, we're kind of looking at over in this area, so not anything big, but something that could track the sun and more efficiently capture it.
And keep them on the roof too, both?
And do both. Now, the downside here is that we can get some grants from Holy Cross and CORE. However, the money would need to be fronted by the EOTC in order to do that.
And then the grant money's paid back? I mean, that money's paid back through the grants from Holy Cross or CORE?
A certain percentage. If you do decide to go down this road, I would need to get in touch with CORE to get a coach, and we start working on it at that point.
Well, I think there shouldn't be any question.
Yep. I'd like to explore as much as we can.
do we have a motion?
I think we shouldn't have any question.
Do we need a motion?
That was my motion.
Yeah.
It was
My
brought
motion is
to-
support solar.
And then I'll second.
Okay, good. Further discussion, Kelly?
I just would caution that there be some outreach about any ground-mounted solar with the surrounding neighborhoods, because
would be part of
we know that to be a flag, and a concern
It's
already.
possible the orientation of ground-mounted might actually be less offensive to the neighbors than the roof-mounted. Just
We're gonna
thinking,
do
we'll
both.
have to look at both.
I'd like to look at possibly locating it further back towards the river. It's out of the view plane of cars, but definitely support ground mounted, probably dual access tracking.
We also have to take into consideration it's in a flight path. We need to make sure we have FAA clearance, which,
Dave?
And I brought this up before, but it's also the Woody Creek folks from the other side are really concerned about the visual effects of the parking lot.
It is because of the visual impacts I wanted to bring this to you.
Got it. It sounds like we've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
David, when you do bring that back, can we just get some firm numbers to the best of our knowledge in terms of cost, annualized return, and energy as well for each different? Because you're going to come back with probably a few options. So
Yeah.
just want some hard data on that in terms of annual expectations.
I feel comfortable voting yes for that, but we also don't have any visual representation whatsoever. We're looking at a red dot aerially, and I think it's
It'll
gonna be
come back.
important to
Look better
get
than
some look at what ground-mounted will
It'll
look
come
like.
back. We got a year and a half to talk about it.
Okay, I think you've got direction on that?
We didn't vote. So David, are you
You
gonna?
didn't vote? Oh, all in favor? Did we?
We voted.
Yeah, we did.
You were
Good question.
Patty?
So I'm,
Or-
Dave, I'm
know, we're
gonna
not used to
move right
this.
into sustainability for you. I think, of course, we should be building anything as sustainable as possible, not going for LEED certification because of the expense, but following those principles as closely as we can. How's that for presenting your
Take that,
sustainability issue?
Wow.
We
Well
rehearsed
done,
it
Patty.
upstairs earlier today.
We have a second from
Motion
Skippy on
for
that one. Is
approval.
that one all right?
I'll make a motion to approve the sustainability issue to look at utilizing LEED's principles, but not pursuing LEED certification.
Second.
Further discussion? Steve?
I think we should exceed lead specifications and not seek lead the official designation. Let's do better than lead if we can.
Good point.
I could support
I
that.
think an aspiration towards net zero, but not
I will
LEED
amend my
certified.
motion to include exceeding LEEDs as best as we can, if possible.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Did you, okay, my amendment?
That
Okay.
was fine with it, okay. Just a-
Moving right along.
David, I'm leaving security.
Trying to get
you.
Marky to her concert.
Okay.
I'm trying.
What you
Just-
going to do,
Oh, but
Marky?
there's a rain.
Egress, I believe that we've already really covered this. We are looking at relocating the egress farther down. It would still be gated up here, so it wouldn't be an everyday use, but could be used during special events in the same extent
Flow.
that the current one is. But we minimize these bus vehicle conflicts that we currently have
Okay.
when it is utilized.
Concert's at 6:30.
EV charging conduit, I believe that we've covered this already, but these lines indicate where we're looking at that conduit.
Got it.
And then security.
You go.
Do you want, oh, you want me to? Okay.
Let's go for security.
Okay, better stay
So
on
we've
that one.
discussed lighting. Obviously, lighting covers the whole thing. We'll be back to you in the spring with more details there. The big question now is, should we be pursuing, and what's your comfort level with the cameras and call boxes? Right now, staff is considering cameras and call boxes in the restroom facility and just call boxes out in the parking area.
Cameras and call boxes in the vicinity of the restroom facility. Is that what you were saying? Okay.
So RAFTA currently has cameras on their platforms.
So David, the call boxes, will they have the blue light like they do down in Anschutz and different campuses down in the Front Ranges, so people could identify where the call box is? I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
David, I have no problem with cameras or boxes, but back to Tori's point earlier and our points about cost. I mean, one, what is the added cost of those cameras? Could they be placed elsewhere? And are they actually needed? Is that an evidence-based approach? Are there incidents that need to be seen?
I would say, and David Johnson's here.
Yeah, David's back there.
Back there.
What have you done, David?
Come up, David. Bring him on up. Bring the victim up.
To pull on him briefly on his experience.
Yeah.
He's with RAFTA and his experience with cameras on the RAFTA side.
Our experience.
You got everybody who wants to come up to the,
Come forth.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, George.
Yeah, thank you.
David, come on up.
Was making sure I knew what I was going to talk about at 6 o'clock or so, so I may have missed that, a little bit of that. So you want to know our experience with cameras and monitoring or seeing. It's kind of it's a mixed bag because we do use them and we do provide. They do record a lot of activity, and we can go back and look at that. And it's been very helpful to RAFTA. But it takes a lot of work to go back and find things. We get a lot of requests, particularly from law enforcement, and that's great. We're glad to use that information. We spent a lot of money on this, and we're glad to put it to good use. But it takes a lot of time to find that, and I think you'll find that when you use these things and you have a lot of them and you have to go back and retrieve them, it's going to take staff time
Whose budget is that from?
yours. No, I don't know.
but I think in light of we had one significant that comes to mind, which was a disturbance between some campers out there where a weapon was drawn of sorts, and I think that alarmed a lot of people who may have changed their mind about parking out there. So I think having cameras and utilizing when we need to pull information is more than appropriate. Sometimes they just post up security camera and there's no camera to be
That
seen.
works,
Yeah. So, but I think we actually need to have them to go back on if need be.
Tori?
Has the sheriff's office been consulted or talked to about this and given us their input?
Not at this point. So right now, we're looking for your comfort level before we start pursuing that direction.
I think we should definitely bring Joey in.
Great idea.
Great idea.
Yeah, certainly. It seems like this is standard practice. We're not doing anything that's out of the ordinary here. This is a standard practice. It's just not something people who don't do it all the time are familiar with. Is that right?
And the reason I bring this to you is similar to it's the perception of it. So which way do you think that people would feel most safe? Because it's important that they feel safe in order to use the facility. So that's what I'm trying to gauge right now.
Right. Steve?
The only way that they would really feel safe would be if someone is watching live screen TV at dispatcher somewhere and could call for law enforcement to go there if there's an incident happening right then. Otherwise, the camera is recording somebody being beat up or that you look at later and you see what happened, but it maybe wouldn't necessarily prevent it from happening or making the person feel more secure.
Ward?
Steve, I think people would feel most secure if there was actually
Mike?
a live person out there. That if you want to go for the highest security, and that's probably also the highest cost, but as far as having sheriff do a swing through there on a regular
I think they do
patrol,
already.
I think that would be helpful, and I think, again, like Dory suggests, get the sheriff's office involved in the conversation.
John?
The
sorry.
cameras are just enforcement or to prosecution afterwards.
Their evidence,
Yeah.
Right.
who did it.
So at Ruby Park, we have a lot of cameras, and I'm glad we do, and they get used a lot. Unfortunately, there's strange things that happen late night out there, and we had to add physical security around there as well. So we have a security company that RAFTA uses as well on their buses to be there as well as the cameras. So, and I want to come back to the point we did have a lot of campers and a lot of homeless and had some incidents. The sheriff did come in and talk to them and moved a lot of them out. So that has gone down quite a bit, but it still exists out there. And at one point, we had people call us up telling they weren't going to park or take the bus anymore out there when it was really bad because of all the things going on. So you're kind of at a remote out there, 2 a.m. And so security, I think, is really going to be important for the lot to get used. Somebody coming off of a job at a restaurant early in the morning or in the late at night. And it's just the extent. And RAFTA ties into RAFTA's system all the way up and down the valley, all the park and rides and Ruby Park. This could be a really big camera system that would have a lot of impact. So I don't know, it's something to think about. But security is really key, and unfortunately, you don't think you should have to have that much, but to protect the facility and the users of the space, you really got to commit to it.
It turns out we do. I know at our most recent RAFT board meeting, it was discussed that the drivers really are experiencing episodes almost every night.
Absolutely.
And it's an issue. So it's not the sort of thing, happily, most citizens don't have to think about it because it's taken care of by systems like this.
I think GR has something to say.
I just had a
Alyssa?
question.
Okay.
On the staff recommendation, it talks about connecting it to RAFTA's existing network. Is that what happens at Ruby Park?
Yes.
Okay. So it's all one.
System. We're never going to get through this meeting.
Right now, we're not going to get done here. Sorry.
My
we gotta
name's
keep it
Jared
moving,
Fielding. I'm
guys.
the county engineer. I can speak towards this a little bit as well. Actually, previous iterations of the EOTC have funded security cameras, both at the ABC underpass, which is tied into the RAFTA system, and at the BOCC underpass, we put in cameras that are tied into the RAFTA system. Technologically, it might be a little bit more difficult here because there's not conduit run already, but running those security cameras is something that is something that we've heard in all of the different public processes for all of the projects that we've had of this type, or that's something that people have requested.
Great.
Right, thanks, GR.
I'll make the motion.
Please do.
I'll make the motion to consider the use of cameras
Where?
throughout the restroom platform and the feasibility.
And consulting, and we'll bring in the sheriff's
Whatever it
office.
says in this
Well-
recommendation.
But I think, okay,
With this security, this is a suggestion coming from staff.
right, but I think the way we're talking here, we think that at the very least, we need to get the opinion of law enforcement.
I just said we're going to
Okay.
bring in the sheriff and ask
We
him.
need to bring in law enforcement, but it seemed to me that the discussion really was about putting cameras throughout the parking. I mean, yes, things can happen in the platform, but that's where probably the best lighting is and the most people. And if you're a bad actor and you're looking to do something bad, you're gonna try to do it
That's correct.
where there aren't people.
Well, I feel like the motion is to have them investigate what the appropriate security would be and combine with sheriff and other people that might have good
You know, whether or not it's a live person between 10 and 2 in the morning or something else, whatever.
Do we need a second
Starts
and
at
then
8
amend the
o'clock.
second and have the discussion? I want to get a second.
I'll
on this.
second the motion.
Okay, now, for the same motion, all right. Further discussion on,
Well, now I'm not sure what the motion is.
Well, the motion is to further investigate the appropriate security measures for the intercept lot. in combination with the sheriff's department and RAFTA and other people that are players in this game.
Are we approving this staff recommendation and amending that?
Yes. We're basically expanding that recommendation.
Yeah.
For them to really delve into
This
this.
is very clear, and I think we should vote on it.
Okay.
I
All in,
have some discussion.
Kelly?
That's okay. Just with my experience in designing security systems for elections, it always starts out with kind of a bigger scope, and then, wow, that's expensive. How do we really get to what we think is important? So, in addition to working with the sheriff's office, I think it would be probably most efficient to come back with 1 or 2 or 3 different options with a price tag associated with it, because those costs climb up really quickly.
all
Oh,
in-
I'm
can I-
sorry.
Can I call this? All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Point well taken.
Aye.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Alyssa.
So how are you gonna get us through the next 5 items
Listen.
in a half an hour? That's your challenge.
All right.
Boy, pressure's on. I thought I was doing great.
Whereas the rest of us are doing it up for you.
Landscaping, let me just tell you real quick, there is no landscaping plan yet. The main item,
Okay, next.
That should be the end.
That's perfect, Dave.
I'll make a motion that
so we are looking at landscaping in the back of the lot to help buffer adjacent property owners. We do have some easement concerns on this area that has been requested because there's underground power lines with Holy Cross and we can't plant on top. So that's why you're not seeing any over there. So I want to make you aware of that. And then the bike path connection, we are looking at continuing this down through between the restroom facilities and the,
the underground on one side.
yeah, so it would be a more intuitive connection, and hopefully it'll help encourage bicycle transit use.
Steve?
On the bike path connection, I would love to see somehow that we have a connection to the airport business center along Shale Bluffs.
That'd be lovely.
I actually have an idea. I'm gonna go walk under there and look at it and see. It might be something, a lower cost way we might be able to do something there.
And I am aware of
walk it
that.
in there.
It is outside the scope here.
Yeah.
So what we have done is any connection would be over on the south side lot.
That side, yeah.
So making sure we're not precluding
Yeah.
anything over
Is
there.
that a question, Ward?
No, I just,
Okay.
you can go under the underpass and curve around to the right and get right on the shoulder. I've done it many times bicycling.
Scary. Regarding just the traffic on that bike crossing through there, there's not going to be pedestrian bicycle incidents in that area of a bike path, is there, that we could
This
avoid?
could be a more congested area right here.
Right.
In talking with Pitkin County Open Space, they suggested, and I think it's a good idea, to include signage that for people who are just looking to go through, to include signage and sharrows to guide them through this area, and then we have a stub out back to the path over on the far side.
Okay, yeah.
The one thing I'd add is, where the 2 access points are across the bus loop.
Right.
In between those 2 points, there would be fencing similar to
Okay.
what's out there today on the other side. So we're gonna direct them.
All right. So we're not pushing the bikes right through the shooting gallery of.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we don't need a vote on that.
No.
All right.
And we've made it through all these.
Dang.
Are we ready for the dynamic message
Yes,
sign?
let's moving right along. Dynamic
Well,
message
that's-
sign is up
that's-
next.
This is a discussion, I thought it was gonna be the
This will take a
longest
couple
one.
minutes.
So as you know, just a little bit of background, we are at 30% plans. We've done initial outreach in combination with the flap grant with adjacent property owners. At the March EOTC, we did reallocate the construction funding to 2019. We did decide on the butterfly design and the 18-foot wide butterfly design sign, as well as the use of Brush Creek Park and Ride. So the next steps at this point are to decide on the location, which would then allow us to move forward to bid and permitting.
Great. Let's see it.
So just to fill you in a few other items, we are still looking into the feasibility of the vehicle and bus travel time. We're hoping to have more details on that after it goes out to bid. We will need to enter into an IGA for the maintenance of the sign. And based on preliminary engineering cost estimates, we are looking at a cost of about $570. We've got $450 bid or budgeted now. So it is currently looking like we would need to come back to look for a little bit more money to make this happen. But we would have an exact number after we got bids back. So I wanted to make you aware of that.
I don't know if it's worth it.
Rachel?
Are there any processes to be able to apply for additional money from CDOT towards this one element?
We have been in touch with CDOT, and short answer is none that they've
Found lately?
found or identified to us.
Great, thanks, George.
Thank you so much.
It's a great project, and we look forward to working with you.
Thanks for coming.
Guys, drive safe.
Keep us under budget.
You know, it was just at the Municipal League meeting where they were talking about the new revenues that are going to CDOT, and it's not a huge amount split among so many. But I'm not sure when the next TPR meeting is. That's usually George for transportation.
Brian should know.
And Brian. But, you know, let's just look for money if we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, we're talking about looking for money at the TPR meeting.
Get us the money, Brian. Okay, moving on.
So as you know, from the staff report, the staff recommendation for the location is, remains at 1 mile down valley from Brush Creek.
Could you point to that one for me?
That is this one right here.
Okay, and then show us where the park and ride is, just on the far left.
Park and ride, to orient you, so we've got Brush Creek Park and Ride here, and this is Brush Creek Road. This red area here, this is the Cozy Point property, so it runs the whole length. Right here we have Smith Hill Way, and then the staff recommended location and the alternate location at 2.2 miles down.
That makes
Then
no
we have
sense.
Wildcat Road right here. So in your packet, you do have the full engineering analysis for each of those locations. Based on safety and usability, we do not recommend anything closer than 1 mile to the intersection.
Got it. Is there
So
some
these
question-
two have been the two closest locations have been identified as being both safe and having appropriate visibility for oncoming traffic.
Tori?
You have the staff recommendation. Where did the alternate location come from? Why are we talking about it?
So when I went back to, as a part of the March 21st meeting, I was tasked with going back to each of the jurisdictions with visualizations of the 18 and 26-foot wide butterfly design, as well as a message list for each sign so you could see how they were both impacted. As a result of the meeting with the City of Aspen, it was identified that the view plane or view shed adjacent to Cozy Point could be impacted by this location. So that is why this then came back, because we didn't provide both location options at the EOTC because due to utilization or utility, we didn't feel as though this was an appropriate site. So we felt as though we only had one real option in terms of location.
So as I was looking at this, I was, considering 1 mile, 2 miles, 60-mile-an-hour traffic. So how does this sign work? Meaning, you're driving along, in 1 mile, you've got to make up your mind that you're going to take a left turn and get on the bus? Is that the impetus? I know that the messaging sign can change. It will have other messages as well, but its overall purpose is to get traffic to turn into this lot. So
Special events primarily.
so I'm just, 2 miles, is that the distance that, again, there are people that do this for a living. There's studies that tell you how these signs actually function. So that's where I come at this question. I don't have a personal preference, but I would think that there is kind of a standard about lead time for turning.
Good point.
The standard on highways is 1 mile.
Okay.
So after the conversation I was with the City of Aspen on Tuesday, that exact idea was brought up. I did do some research since then. I wasn't able to find anything that said percentage-wise that you get so far away and it diminishes by so much. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but what I was able to identify, and part of the guidance here was CDOT and their recommendation that any dynamic message sign should be placed about 1 mile from the decision point. So if you're driving down the interstate, most of those signs are about 1 mile prior. I did also look into California, New York, and Michigan. They were also 1 mile.
Yeah, they're all 1 mile.
Yeah.
At all rates of speed, at all velocities?
Even 75 miles an hour.
Well, 75.
You know,
These were based on limited access highways.
we've spent some considerable time in Snowmass Town Council talking about the DMS sign, and we've all driven it. That whole part of the highway, as I'm sure Steve has quite frequently. 2.2 miles, you even forget what you're looking at. I did it again yesterday, and I'm going, my God.
Yeah.
There's just, where am I supposed to go? Why is it here? It makes no sense. The 1 mile, and it's perfect, it does.
It might be an age thing. I don't
Oh, stop. Love each other.
No, there's
But
a-
the 1 mile, and looking at it, it does not block Cozy Point.
And I have something to add to that real quick. Thanks to George Newman, he realized that there's 2 HOV signs right back to back on that section. So we're gonna look at maybe removing one of them, so it's gonna declutter that section.
That would be
We
helpful.
have one HOV sign that we know people pay such good attention to, and then we have this dynamic message sign, which I think is appropriately placed.
Yeah.
right where the
Rachel and then Steve.
Yeah, I'm okay with it being in the 1 mile zone. I really have a question about the visual here with the other little teeny squares that are right next to the one. Were those other, no, on the
Signs.
road,
Oh,
were those
these.
other considered locations and eliminated or something?
No, that is distance from the sign, so that's when you're approaching it, that's how far it is.
Okay.
So that's an
Because
analysis.
the only thing I was thinking a little bit is if that moved back to 1 or 2 of those squares, but again, in the general zone, because it's so close to Smith Hill Road intersection. And, you got someone distracted by reading the sign and looking at it, and then we've already had traffic accidents there. We have cross-traffic coming up. And so I was just thinking that if it's a little further back from that first circle, maybe the second one back or something, it might be just a little safer. But that, small around the edges.
David, did you consider that? Do you want to add anything to that? I think it's a good point she's made, and we're thinking it's a mile from Brush Creek, but it's only 250 yards from
Smith Hill
Smith Hill
intersection and
Road.
people
And that's the
entering.
most dangerous intersection in the county.
We almost
And
had to
that-
signalize it before.
That has been considered, and that was the reason why this area over here is considered unsafe.
Right.
Is because if you place it on this side,
Yeah, I'm not saying on that side, I'm
Yeah.
saying use one of the 2 little
moving it back
distance
towards
squares
Cozy
back.
Point.
Yeah, one of those 2, so it's a little further back from Smith Hill.
But then you have a concern about sight distance.
yeah, you've got
There's a line
sight
of sight.
distance, that and, yeah, I'll just
Okay.
say it's sight distance.
Okay, so it has to be there, so, okay.
Right here.
Answers that question.
Come on down.
Chris Burry with Pitkin County Public Works, yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Chris.
I can speak to that point. Yeah, we can look into moving the sign probably 100, 200, 300 feet down and still keep our required site distances for visibility and legibility. So that should something we consider. We actually have to pick the location to minimize any impacts to any utilities, any roadway infrastructure like culverts or anything like that. And there's actually an entrance to the Cozy Point access that we picked our exact location right now that we're showing at the 30% design plans, just to be able to fit our guardrail, which is required at the DMS sign, so we can fit within that.
So it requires
without
a
impacting that.
a guardrail
that
on the highway.
access. So we just have to make sure that we evaluate where our guardrail can fit within our location that we want.
Okay, but if it's possible to move it 100 or 200 feet and still
Might
hit
need
all the
to be more than that to
criteria,
make a difference.
we can go with it, but generally, it's about a mile away. Okay, I think that'd be great.
100 or
Yeah,
200
I think
feet's
so.
really about 2 seconds, just so.
Yeah. So, I mean, this sign is very difficult for me. I'm sure you guys have all dealt with that as well from an aesthetic perspective. It just continues that sort of urbanization, homogenization of our valley, which I frankly hate. But what also contributes to that is traffic. So if it's actually getting cars off the road, I could find it worth it. And so that's what Dave was mentioning. I asked that question at the last meeting was, do we have any hard data to show us that if we put this up, X amount of traffic, it'll be an estimate, we'll get off the road. And while I appreciate that this is the optimum spot, have we any test cases that demonstrate that this will actually get cars off the road?
The data I was able to find said that the most effective way to get cars off the road is to give them travel times. And that's the way you can get them to change course. And that's clearly what showed up in our survey as well. And that's technology that we're looking at. That's why I brought up that we're still evaluating the technology available to measure the travel time between a bus and a car, because we're not looking to divert people to, say, Smith Hill Way. We want them to get on the bus.
Right.
So that's a piece that we're still looking into. And I don't know that we're going to have good, solid answers until we get bids back.
Right, but presumably there's a future where the sign says park and ride left, bus 14 minutes, traffic 53 minutes.
Exactly. That's what we're shooting for.
I don't know how this proceeds, but could I vote yes on this? But, is there a second chance for me to say no if we're not going to go that?
You can make a motion.
I would say it's likely
don't
you'll
need a
get a
motion.
second chance because the bid will probably come in higher than the 450.
Right.
In which case, we would have to come back and discuss
Yeah.
funding.
And I also just want to
Sure, Kelly.
mention too, to consider other value that this sign could bring for evacuations and special event information and closures of ski parking and all that kind of stuff. Too, should this technology not come to bear in the timing that we might want, weighing those other values in this decision.
Thank you, Kelly. Steve?
The people who come every day on the highway, they might be anticipating going on Smith Hill Way or turning left into the park at the Brush Creek. They're gonna be in the left lane anticipating, they wanna see what the sign says about the traffic, what's the delay, and then they would make their decision. How are they gonna get into town? Are they gonna turn left, or are they gonna be going to Brush Creek? It should be in the left lane already at that point, because if it's heavy traffic, it might take you a whole mile to get moved over into the left lane. So that's just thinking, what are people gonna do in reality when the sign is there? And how those who will probably be using it the most.
We'll use it on ski
It
Saturdays.
is possible, yes. And like I said, that's one of the, placing it over here, we might be able to avoid some of that, but then we run into safety issues. But I'm not sure on a good way to totally avoid that situation.
Do you have a motion on the table yet?
I don't think we even need a motion here, do we? Do we need a motion to approve this one?
We do.
We do. Okay. All right. Just want to I didn't see an asterisk. You threw me off.
Oh.
The alternate location was picked for a reason, and I'm sure you've all gone through this, so we're kind of reinventing the wheel. I don't want to undo what the time you've spent on this. The alternate location was starting to look good to me, and I don't know if anyone else agrees, but, what's wrong with putting it that far down? I know we're going to have some other fixed signs that are reinforce whatever the message is between there and the lot, Brush Creek lot. So tell us, what was the option regarding the alternate location and additional signage? We're going to remove an HOV sign or two, but we might add a fixed sign that reminds people to take a left at the park and ride.
So what we had discussed back in March was putting a static sign somewhere in this area that just says Brush Creek Park and Ride left. So that if you pass this sign and you have a message on there that says free bus, Brush Creek Park and Ride, people are like, I don't know what that is. Then you've got a directional sign over on this a little bit farther down.
Right, okay. Ward?
I think most of the people that are going to be using this are familiar with that road, and after they see the sign there once or twice, that they'll be looking at what the traffic times are, and they'll make up their mind. And I don't think that it's particularly going to get the first-time user, first-time driver coming into town. So I guess I'm going with the staff recommendation. I would go with that.
I think one of the things we need to be very mindful of this sign is messaging skier traffic this winter, I don't know how many times all of the lots were filled with snowmass. And people would come up to Snowmass, only have to go back down to Brush Creek. And if they knew that our parking lots, the free parking lots are filled, they're gonna turn left. So it may not be the first time user, it could be a lot of people coming up Valley to ski. And then the second part of it is, there are a lot more special events going on, particularly in Snowmass, in case people don't know what's going on in Snowmass. So those special events, we need to get them out of the rodeo lot or Town Park Station because those are starting to overflow. So the point of this is, I think it's perfect and I think it's perfectly placed.
Okay. Rachel?
I just think we put the message on the message board, as you saying, Marky, and when you say parking in Aspen, $6 an hour, turn left, free parking, it's gonna make a difference.
I think that's great.
I'd like to, oh, go ahead.
Just one more suggestion, whoever's going to make a motion. I'd like to suggest that we do a bit of exploration on how we might sort of beautify the sign, describe it, make it unique, be it, a wrap or some kind of concealment, but make it look a bit different than it would over I-25 would be awesome.
Wrap it with a scenic picture of Cozy Point.
Well, yeah, or the mountains in the background. I mean, honestly.
Stone, a base,
So I'd like that
a plinth or something. I don't know what's possible.
The standard is to paint it so that it's not just a steel. Outside that, we would have to run it by CDOT. It would be part of their permitting as to what they would allow or not allow.
See what would be possible.
Yeah.
Wrap it with a sagebrush
Back to
design.
Markey.
Okay, I move that we move forward with a dynamic messaging sign following staff recommendation regarding location.
I will second that.
And we have a second. Further discussion. I just want further discussion for me as wildlife's a big concern. This is an elk carnage area. One guy hit 5 elk in one crash this winter, killed 3 on the spot. This is a place where that sign could really help save the lives of a lot of elk.
Are they gonna read it?
The elk, yeah. But you have to put it where they can see
They
it.
can cross where the sign says it was.
Yeah.
Yes. Patty, amazing.
Very fast.
This is what I have to work with? Okay, all in favor? All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
Happy back. I can pick on you.
Okay, now we still had a
Never
couple
even
more,
made it to my visualizations.
we had a couple more things to do. We've got another half hour probably, so Mark, you may miss the opening act.
Well, we'll all miss it because we all go to the
That's
Thursday
right.
night concerts.
Who's on tonight?
Whitaker?
Let's keep moving.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to get back up to my, because the
Retreat.
retreat got placed separately. So if you recall from the last EOTC meeting, I sent out a doodle poll. We identified a date for the retreat. That date has been set for August 7th from 8:15 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Aspen Meadow Resorts. The goals of the retreat is first to establish a baseline of understanding of the EOTC purpose, requirements, structure, funding, and operations. The next is to identify the strengths, opportunities, and challenges facing the EOTC today. And the third is to create a priority list of themes, major topics, and projects to help guide the EOTC's next steps. So that's really anticipated to be the product at this point. And the compilation of the priority list, I think, can be anything from governance to priorities in terms of transit or what have you. So the goal, it's been about 5 years since you've had a retreat. You now have me on board, so you have a resource that you didn't have before. And so from my perspective, I want to make sure that I'm spending my time wisely and working on projects that you all find are useful and valuable for me to be spending my time on. So I've got that self-interest, but I also believe that because of the time that has passed, it's time to revisit this, strategic portion of the EOTC's purpose.
Is there anything on this list that's missing that you?
I would just suggest that given today's meeting and how hard it is to get through things sometimes with 3 different bodies, that we go ahead and book it till 4 o'clock instead of 3. There's going to be good, lengthy discussions. It's the first time in 5 or 7 years, whatever. So that's my first comment. The second is I want to make sure we are using the resources that we already have available for informing our discussion when we get into the identification of transportation projects and themes. Particularly, the city did a lot of work with its concept of mobility lab and shift, and that did not go forward, but there were elements that were really valuable. And so I think we should have that on the table as we're discussing it, more of the, should there be specific shuttles that go to Red Mountain and don't just drop people at Ruby Park? That was a fairly decent idea to capture some people, but it fell off when the whole project fell off. So I don't want us to have to sit there re-brainstorming, well, maybe we could try this and maybe we could try that, drawing from any of the older documents or efforts that we've made in the past. And the second thing is we have either at this or coming from this, how do we measure the bang for the buck as we go forward with projects, and talk about a matrix or how we will make decisions, because we'll have far more projects on the list that we can afford or do in a short fashion. But how do we set outcome expectations, whether it's like expectations for the effectiveness of the message sign or anything else we do. So those are kind of components to me of what a retreat should at least identify going forward. I don't know that we have to spend a lot of time on it, but how do we sort through those many transportation projects and themes, and how do we start to measure bang for buck and place outcome goals on them?
I think.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be answered now. That's just my input to a retreat.
Yeah, and that is good feedback. The intent isn't to end up with a list of infrastructure projects. It's intended to end up with a list of major themes to be working towards, and major areas that we need to be working on.
It'll bleed into projects.
It will, and it could very well have projects on it, and it could very well start with projects and end up in themes.
Yeah.
So I think that the discussions could go all over the place, as you said. To look at the agenda and just walk you through what we're anticipating, and I apologize, Stephanie Zaza was supposed to be here tonight, but she had a death in the family and wasn't able to make it last minute. So we're looking at the morning, going through EOTC basics, so that would be me doing a presentation on basically the history of the EOTC, where it's coming from, the successes that it's had. The EOTC has had great success over the years. And really building that sort of environmental scan and background for you to then move into a SWOT or SOC analysis. So this is where all of those ideas get thrown out in terms of what are the EOTC's strengths, opportunities, and challenges. And then the afternoon would be then distilling those into manageable themes and focus areas. And then prioritizing those themes and focus areas. So is the governance of the EOTC, is that something that we really need to focus on right away, or is it something else? Is it something operations related? Is it infrastructure related? Where should we be placing our attention and our energy to make sure that this group not only functions efficiently and effectively, but that we're also getting to the ends that you want to be getting to. So I don't necessarily see this as we're going to have one retreat, we're going to solve it, we're going to be done. I see this as really we're going to be setting out the next steps. Where do we want to go from there, and how do we continue to achieve what we want to achieve? So that's my vision.
Follow up on that. I think that sounds great. I really look forward to it, and I'm glad you're on board helping us organize. The one thing I would ask that we try to do is prepare beforehand a memo for us all that is where we are at now. This group was essentially the genesis of the Regional Transportation Authority. Right. And started the initial funding. But from when we started in '93 to what we've accomplished thus far, but also, and the RAFTA board members obviously are totally up to speed. I'm not sure the rest of us are, of what we're going to be seeing in terms of benefits from the increased services and what RAFTA is doing. So I think just, again, it doesn't have to go over it at the retreat, but a memo beforehand of where are we now? How many people are we moving? Where are they parking? What do we got? How many parking spaces do we have in Snowmass, Aspen? Just a baseline that can guide our conversations.
And that's a packet in advance, clearly enough prep so we come prepared for this.
Right, so we can have read through it and our questions are answered and maybe we can save some time.
Really
that
get
way.
some RAFTA presentation in there. I wanted to say pretty much the same thing, but I wanted to also add that we're working on an airport visioning plan, which is still out there with our various committees. Multimodal transportation, it seems that the airport ought to connect to the bus somehow and to the other transportation solutions. So that should be part of the conversation, and I'm not sure what we'd get in the way of a presentation, but I think it has to be.
That's a whole presentation in itself.
Well, yeah, but it should not be part of this retreat.
But Greg, I think that the transportation issue of connectivity to the airport is not part of the airport vision.
Right. It isn't.
RAFTA is sort of taking that separately.
I believe you're right. I'm concerned that it's not part of the vision. John's coming up to talk to us.
It is part of the vision.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah, and so the, again, as a vision statement, it won't be at the design level necessarily, but we are asking, about all aspects of the experience at the airport, and that does include connectivity to the community. We are certainly not there yet. The EA that was approved did include both transportation corridors, the existing rail corridor, as well as transit connectivity from the airport to the community. So it is part of the overall scope. I would encourage that is probably a more detailed and broader discussion that we'll be able to bring back, but we do recognize the importance of the airport as a transit link.
I wanted to add what I think Rachel's the one who suggested we go till 4. This is a body that meets 8 hours a year, as one of our members pointed out. If this retreat needs to go till 5 that day, I'm good with it. I'd like to have time to really contemplate all this, because this is the important work. And when the public finds out we have a retreat but we didn't talk about something as important as that, it makes me a little nervous.
Well, I think stretching it to 5 o'clock may exhaust our ability to think.
That was our concern too.
Adding an additional hour makes better sense.
Yeah, and we can end early if we can end early. I just wanted to make sure we had booked enough
Yeah,
time.
let's make sure we have the time to get it all in.
Greg, perhaps on your question on the airport to John, it's more maybe we just need the factoids of how many parking spaces are they looking at? Because the airport will have either huge expense building those parking spaces or parking spaces underground or whatever, or it's going to connect well with transit and then need less parking spaces. And so, again, if we even have some ideas of what they're looking at with traffic generation or those numbers to look at in the retreat, but not the whole plan.
Yeah, and we may or may not be that far along in the visioning process. We can certainly provide what was approved in the environmental assessment. I do think in the visioning process, there's still a conversation ongoing about employments and growth and those sorts of things that the committees, a couple of you are on those committees, are going to be considering over the next several meetings over the next few months. So we will provide the most updated information. It may be what's in the EA right now.
Okay, great. Point taken.
This is probably for an airport meeting and not right now, but since I got you. Hey, is there any studies, data, surveys that have been done with folks that are arriving in Aspen, knowing where people that are getting off of airplanes, how they're traveling to their final destination, what their destinations are? Is that information?
We have some of that in the EA. I would not. I wouldn't. I don't know how accurate it is. Frankly, for how most folks are traveling either by shuttle or car. There is not a lot of transit uptake on the airport right now.
I would suggest, knowing that everybody that flies into Aspen comes through the same exact doorway, you have a great opportunity to really ask a question of people that are visiting us. And I think Rachel makes a good point about, what the demands are going to be and at the airport are going to be determined by what systems the airport puts in. And there's a lot of new things that have been talked about. And so I think having that kind of information from the visitors would be a great thing. And I think, you've got a captive audience on an airplane coming in. So
and
a simple survey on an airplane would be great.
Yep.
good point. Let's note it.
Probably
keep this-
not for necessarily this retreat, but we can do as part of the airport planning project.
Sorry, all right, the next retreat we can discuss that will be a full year later, I assume, so just keeping that in mind. Okay, anything else? Let's keep it going.
That was everything I had on the retreat. I just wanted to see, like, the memo is a great idea. If you're receptive to that, I can certainly put that together and get that out to you.
That was a great venue, so thank you.
Okay.
Put the extra hour in.
If we can get all written material in plenty of time to read ahead of time, just so we can hit the ground running right from the get-go on that.
Okay.
Great.
I can do
It's
that.
precious time when we can all be together. and
It's
let's make the
great,
most of it.
great to have you putting this together.
And I'm sorry Stephanie couldn't be here, understandably. Her credentials look really good
She got
and
really
impressive.
interesting
And
credentials.
maybe we send her a link to this so she can get a sense of the cast of characters she's going to be working with.
She was very disappointed that she couldn't make it.
Yeah, we don't want to scare her away, do we? Okay, I want to keep this going. Give us what's next.
I think next is
David Beckler.
It's going to take me a while to get back through this presentation to get to your slide.
It's actually very short and sweet. We've just kind of completed a public outreach process to get some input on a very conceptual design, pre-sketch, if you will, if you understand sketch, primary, and final land use planning. What you see there is an image of the existing Rafta Depot. It was built probably around 1972 when they finally found that Snowmelt Road, being a straight road from top to bottom, became a luge run, and they had to put a kink in it just to slow everybody down. So what we're dealing with is a very aged and dated structure. We've been working with Rafta. We've been working with the adjacent property owner. We've been working with the mall merchants themselves. But in a lot of ways, this is a three-dimensional puzzle. The site is very challenging. It's constrained by topography and development on one side and a creek on the other side. The demands here are significant. A major goal for the community has been to try and give transit a priority as the means of mobility between our community, city of Aspen, and our labor force down valley. One of those main objectives is to put the transit facility on the mall grade at the center of what is the community of Snowmass, or its historic center. One of the challenges in doing this has been the MCI bus, the 45-foot Rafta bus. We're trying to design to the lowest common denominator. So that has been a real challenge to make sure that we can fit the 4 bays that Rafta is looking for that can be fully operational and independently functional. That's been a big challenge. We're trying to accommodate our local system here with Rafta. It sounds trivial, but it is a major impact to the regional system, is that once we made it free from Aspen to Snowmass, now Rafta is carrying local trips, which are occupying regional seats. And that's a big impact on the regional service in the peak hour. When you get to Base Village, the bus is full, he can't pick up at the other stops going out of town. And then they get to an employee housing complex down by Town Park Station, and 12 people get off the bus, and now you've got empty seats. So that's one of these goals, is to bring both systems together so that we truly try to siphon off local trips back onto the local shuttle and free up more capacity on the regional shuttle. I wish I had some images to give you, but we're still in a process. We just finished with council's look at the project. And we're planning to go to the Planning Commission very soon, here in July, to give them a look at it. Once we get community buy-in to what this design can be and look like and is acceptable to the community, then we're going to do a value engineering study to get a cost price for what the projects could theoretically run. So again, we're very preliminary. We have achieved a lot of goals that we set for the program. We are trying to stay within The dollars allotted, some 7 million is what we're trying to use as a target for the project budget. I know it's late. That's a lot of information. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I have one quick question. I think it would be great after all the years of hearing about Snowmass Transit Station to actually have you guys get one.
I've been working on it since '83,
They
so
have one at
I'm
the
with you
rodeo
all the
lot.
way.
I've been hearing about it since '98, so you're way ahead of me. But I think it would be great. I think this is a good start again.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, Dave's done. David Johnson.
Yay.
This is David Day today. Usually it's
something
John
with
Day. right?
transportation.
It's John Dave. Dave.
Yeah, thanks. I feel so special until Marky came up and said, make this quick.
Right, yeah.
So I will.
Marky, you can take your time. I'm very familiar with it.
22 minutes.
Love you, Dave.
She wants to get to the
You got all your slides on.
Okay. Do I just press? Okay.
Next.
Got it. Okay. So November 2018, we successfully passed the Destination 2040 ballot measure 7A for 2.65 mil property tax. A lot of that is coming from your communities, so thank you. It was one of only 2 such measures in the entire state that passed in November. So thank you
Congratulations,
especially.
Rafta.
Thank you. Well,
Well, it took a lot of heavy lifting, right, Greg?
There was a lot of work. I appreciate everyone who did that.
well, we appreciate that, and we thought, well, maybe we better report back to you often on how it's going with all these projects. I think there are about 25 projects programs and projects that we said that we were going to implement, and not all of them. I'm not showing all of them. I'm showing the ones that are either in Pitkin County or are generally of interest to the EOTC, hopefully. So I'll just cruise through these slides to give you a progress report on these. First of all, bus replacement. I think the day after we realized that this initiative was successful, we bought 10 new buses. We really needed new buses. When I'm out and about right now on the bus or wherever, I still see some of the relics that need to get off the road. So they'll be coming in December of 2019. But don't worry, if you like any of those old buses, we'll be keeping them for X days probably. And then when they can't run, we'll part them out, and then maybe they'll end up in someone's front yard.
Tiny house.
Battery electric buses. We are also replacing 8 buses with 8 battery electrics, and they will be operating primarily within the city of Aspen. For one, because the local governments around here provided a lot of the funding, and also because we need to keep these buses near the mothership to get them charged to make sure that this is a pilot program. We got to make sure these things run, so we want to keep them close to an
Dave,
energy
can I
source.
ask a question on electric? I remember one of the issues that really drove us toward electric was Highlands and diesel fumes at Highlands being a problem with all the buses cycling through there. Are electrics going to help relieve some of that?
I believe we've been looking at a number of different routes, and I believe Highlands is on there. And if it's not, it's because we're probably scared of taking it that far.
Agreed.
But that doesn't mean that's just because we're trying to be ultra conservative in how we run these things.
We'll
just for the
try one
first.
and see how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, great,
They get
thanks.
my neighborhood first.
No, my neighborhood.
Yeah, right.
Yours
Okay, Rio Grande?
Okay.
Yeah, next one, Rio Grande, we replaced some bridge decks and substructure repairs at Roaring Fork, Emma, and Wingo Bridges, and we're also doing some asphalt repair. That's going to be going on and on every year on the trail. Let's see, we committed to doing 5 or 6 service improvements. We're starting, all of those will be implemented within a year. This one, 30-minute valley service with enhanced snowmass service, that started April 22nd. We now have weekend BRT, and as part of that, Carbondale circulator service, because that's kind of a must operationally. I won't get into that. Basically, now we'll have BRT running 365 days a year. Better transit service connections to Snowmass Village. That actually started in 2018, but we said that if this passed, we would take over the funding of that. And so we did. Improvements to the Mid-Valley Highway 82 bus stations. Most of these are in Pitkin County. Design of the priority needs at each of these stations is going on, and then we'll make them happen next year.
None of these include giant eggs, right?
They all do.
Only at BRT stations.
No way. Really?
That's how you know it's a
Wait,
BRT.
wait,
For the
That's how you know
Velociraptor.
it's a Velociraptor
Yeah.
stop.
No.
'Cause there's a
And not a
dinosaur.
regular local
kidding me.
stop.
Oh.
There's a purpose.
I thought we were gonna just quietly let that one die.
Oh, I like,
I love
Oh, I
these.
love them.
The kids
I'll be
love
on
them.
record.
yeah.
They're
Okay,
really
keep
fun.
going.
Considering the
Sorry.
overall cost is a $50 million
Bridget knows.
project,
She
the
knows
eggs are
it's
not
a
that
dinosaur.
Greg, I second that.
Remember, it's fast, fun, and frequent, and the eggs are part of the they're
That'd
part
be
of
a
the
good
fun.
fun.
Okay,
and
I'm
maybe
sorry I
fast.
brought that up. Go ahead.
Good times.
Okay, improvements to the town of Snowmass Transit Center. We've been working with Snowmass, and
Don't forget
yes, it's
that.
been a battle. You know, limited land, lots of expectations, limited budget, and
Hey,
then
bring it back
Raft
to the-
comes along
bring
and
it back
says we
to the
want 4
presentation.
We're gonna
stalls. So
separate you two over there.
anyway,
Okay. Okay, and what's,
Aspen Maintenance Facility, still one of our key facilities. We have a number of improvements planned over the next 5 to 10 years, but the biggest priority is replacing these fuel tanks. They're 30 years old, they're fine, we monitor them like crazy, but they will be replaced next year. Design is going on right now.
excellent.
Can I ask?
Rachel?
At the RAFTA maintenance facility here, when the buses are washed, is there a oil separator or anything for the water that eventually filters through down towards the Roaring Fork?
I am not sure, but I'm gonna say, I can get back to you. I'm 99% sure that we do that. I couldn't
Okay.
imagine. we wouldn't.
I just like to make sure, because I know we were looking at it when we redid our Public Works building, and I can't, we didn't get the extra money to do that, unfortunately. But I just was wondering, as RAFTA's improving and modernizing things like leaking fuel tanks, it'd be good to look for any other
They're not leaking,
carbon.
but-
Well, could potentially, yeah, replacing them before.
Yes,
They
yes.
are leaking. And then second was, I just really am not clear, because I had this head cold, but when you went back to the enhanced Snowmass Village bus service, does that take out the EOTC dollar support? So that continues to grow more as an EOTC fund?
No.
Or was that just increased service connecting, I mean, I can't remember, we talked a lot about the free bus service potentially being taken over by RAFTA as they expanded neighborhood service in other communities in the whole service area. But I just couldn't remember if it,
And funding coming from the new ballot measure rather than funding coming from us.
right, and it did. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Right.
Well, that'll help pay for that transit center.
Any other questions?
Did you want to bring up the Glenwood Maintenance Facility? Because there's work going on as a result of the 7A, and I think it's really important.
Sure. We are pursuing a build grant again this year we're applying for $8 million. We've had to cut back. Build grant funding is so competitive. Last year, we asked for $22 million because this whole facility renovation and expansion is roughly $32 million. So we decided to cut it back, and we are applying for funding along with local funding to do one primary component, and that is heated enclosed storage for 60 buses. As you buy new, buses, whatever, 20 years ago were just these kind of workhorse things. Detroit diesels operated anywhere, kind of like your Ford, kind of like your pickup truck. Now they're kind of orchid children, and we're running CNGs. We're going to be running battery electric buses. They have all sorts of components on them, so we want to keep them inside, and we think that will. That's going to add to longevity and reduce maintenance.
The only other thing you may want to talk about is the LOVA Trail to help with our colleagues in Newcastle.
Okay, yeah. LOVA,
Lower Valley.
Lower Valley Trails Association
LOVA.
has been, also probably since the 80s, has been working on trying to fund and construct a trail roughly between Glenwood Springs and actually probably all the way to eventually to even the state line, I think.
As in Utah?
Yeah. But right now,
Let's
though,
take
the
it to
most
Newcastle.
critical
Going
and
the other way.
challenging part, though, is just the 12
Glenwood
miles
Canyon.
between Glenwood Springs and Newcastle. So as part of this ballot initiative, and again, we really had to ratchet down the ballot initiative to make it pass. We were authorized for up to 5 mills, and we ended up asking for 2.65. And we passed that by a 4% margin. So we cut back on a lot of projects. So we have committed to $2 million to fund the LOVA Trail. And hopefully, but that that won't get you 12 miles of Lova Trail in that challenging terrain. So, but it will match a lot of grants, and we are committed to working with those communities between Newcastle and Glenwood Springs to make that happen.
If I could, we had our raft retreat, was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, very recently. And it was, were you not there?
I was in Africa. Bob.
You were in Africa. Bob was there. It was a great retreat. A lot of wonderful things came up, a lot of interesting stuff. I put in my 2 cents worth in about how we've been doing our mental health first aid trainings for Pitkin County. Recently with Mind Springs, we've trained 26 new trainers, and we're spreading them out in the community. I encouraged RAFTA to take on a mental health first aid because their drivers are the first point of contact, those late night contacts with with difficult situations. So hopefully we're going to move forward with that. But I want to encourage Snowmass and Aspen as well. Get your staffs trained. It's easy. It's probably free or close to it, and it's really important. So anyway, but RAFTA, Dan embraced that, and I'm so grateful that he did. I just want to make sure we keep that going, because I know our public health director knows about it and is eager to get started. Great.
That's great. Thanks for bringing that up, Greg.
Anything else? Do we need a motion to? Are we ready for a motion?
I think you should make a Marky.
Marky might want to make a
Motion to adjourn at 6:19.
Second.
Second. Further discussion?
No, but thanks,
No,
guys.
thank you, Greg. Thanks.
All in favor?
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Good job.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
6:19. That's 19 minutes we'll never get back.
Past 6.
I thought the agenda